So let's talk about succeeding with open houses in your business. I want to talk about kind of overall, kind of remind you what your job is when you're doing an open house. I want to talk about finding open houses. I also want to talk about maybe 6 hacks so that you're getting a good return on investment with your time with these open houses. Because like, raise your hand if you have done an open house, a good solid afternoon open house, and you just got a couple people through the door. We all have. It's like, great, I got 1 or 2. Now, we always prepare for that. And it's like, hey, have your laptop with you, have something good to read, post on social media. You make use of that time. But that's not the goal of open house. It's not library time and social media post time. That's just our backup plan. So I want to talk about some things that I think really make a difference. Now, we have some newer agents on this call, and we have some very experienced agents on this call. Doesn't matter what year you're at. Open houses are a great opportunity for you to build your business. And even if you find yourself at any time in your career, if your business is down, this is a great way to build your business back up. Now, there are realtors out there that this is actually the foundation of their business. This is primarily what they do. A good friend is an agent in Houston, and her first year in the business, the majority of her business came from open houses. And she just went cray-cray on open houses and really turned it into a very successful tool for her in her business. But she didn't have listings at the time. She was a brand new agent. So one thing we're going to cover is where to find the open houses. The first thing I want to start with, though, is an overview and just a reminder of really what is your job when you're doing an open house. Now, number 1 job is, and this can vary whether it's your listing or whether it's someone else's listing, but the number 1 job is to really represent that house and that neighborhood well. So the critical factor there is you've got to know that house, you need to know the builder, you need to know the neighborhood. But so you're representing the house. If it's not your listing, it's also your job to make the other agent look good, to make that listing agent look good. And you do that by being prepared and being professional and really knowing what you're talking about, doing what you say you're going to do, showing up on time, staying the whole time. You have to make that other agent kind of look good. If I have another agent doing an open house on one of my listings, I always get them on the phone beforehand because I want to make sure they fully understand the house, they understand the neighborhood, they understand how important it is that they show up early and they stay till the very, very end. Even if it's just crickets at that open house, you don't get to leave early because it's a reflection on that other agent if you're not up to par with any of that, right? So you do have that obligation to that other agent. So you have an obligation to the seller and the house. You have an obligation to that other agent. If it's your listing, that concept still, of course, that applies. If you say you're doing it from 12 to 3, you got to be there from 12 to 3. If it's 1 to 4, you got to be there from 1 to 4. I'll throw this in. So make the listing agent look good, gain exposure for the seller. Remember, that's when we market with our sellers and when we're talking to sellers about what we do to market their property and promote their property, they understand that open house is a way for us to expose that property to more people on the market. And it is, but it's also an opportunity for us to grow our businesses. But we've got to keep the sellers. We have to keep the sellers first. We're expanding the marketing for that seller to gain additional exposure. I want to encourage you with your open house efforts to look like the hardest working realtor ever. Here's one way that you do this. If you have a vacant listing, whether it's yours or it's another agent, and it's a vacant listing, sometimes you can do this with new construction. If you build a relationship with a builder, you can do this. But if it's a vacant listing, especially if it's at an attractive location and price point, I want to make a little caveat there. You might have the most amazingly gorgeous house that's available to do an open house. But if the location is just like impossible to get to, there's a chance that open house may not be worth your time, right? If it's out in the country or if it takes 7 to 8 to 9 turns to get there, it may not be the best open house. It's like, oh, I know, but this is the coolest house ever. It's like, yeah, and you might be lucky if you get a couple people through the door. So you have to assess that. So you could have even just an average house that's in the best location, like even on a busy intersection or just on a busy street in a popular neighborhood, that's going to be a great open house opportunity, is just because it's easy for people to get to. But a vacant house, you can consider, what if you held it open every single day, or like 3 days a week, 5 days a week? What if you did 7 days a week for like 2 weeks in a row, or 6 days a week, 2 weeks in a row, or Thursday through Sunday for like 3 weeks in a row? It's like, nope, this is now my office. I'm going to be here I'm going to be here Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for the next 3 weeks. It's a great house. It's a great location. I'm going to meet all the neighbors. They are going to know me. They're going to see my signs. They're going to see me here constantly. You're going to end up looking like the hardest working realtor in town. So in that case, that strategy with that house becomes a strategy for impressing the neighbors. It becomes a strategy for picking up business from people on the street. I've heard a story, and I've heard lots of stories of agents that this was their kind of their open house technique. And they said that people will eventually stop into the open house just because they wanted to meet the hardest working realtor they had ever seen. They're like, I see you out here every day putting your signs up. I see you. I just needed to meet this realtor who was doing all this work, right? And then you build that relationship, you build that friendship and that opportunity. So that can be a strategy for your vacant properties. It just becomes your office. It's like, look, I'm going to spend X amount of time here, and you'll get a lot of attention. It's a great opportunity. So let's talk about finding open houses first. Now, if you consistently have listings yourself, you may have just solved that problem. It's like, look, hold your houses open. But what if you have a listing and it's not in an area that you work with regularly, but you'd rather do the listing in the area of town that you live in, that open house? It's like, okay, I'm going to do this open house a lot, but I think I want someone else to do this other open house. That's just not my jam. So you can find some other realtors to do the open house for you. But let's say you don't have the listing and you want to build these open house opportunities. Well, the first thing that I would do is I would just go into the MLS. I'd look in the area of town that you're most interested in and sort it for your brokerage. So see who in your brokerage has listings in that area. The principle here is become the best friend of that realtor, of that listing agent. Who are the top listing agents in your area? Who are the top listing agents in your brokerage? What if you became their most reliable? There's a really important word with this entire conversation. But what if you became like their most reliable open house person ever? You always did what you said you were going to do. You showed up on time. You were really good with communication. Here's another rule with your open houses. If you're doing an open house for another agent, you need to be a really good communicator with that agent. Text them when you're on the way, text them when you get there. Definitely text them at the end of that open house and let them know how it went. I think that's a must. And here's why. If I have someone else holding an open house in my listing, my sellers know that the open house was from 1 to 4. What if the sellers call me at 4:10 and they want to know how it went and I don't know the answer to that question? So that's one of those things where you're helping that listing agent look good to their seller because you gave them feedback right at the end of it. Hey, here's the number of people that came through. Here was the feedback that we received, yada, 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 so that they can get on the phone. In most cases, they do. In most cases, that listing agent is on the phone with their seller right away. Hey, I wanted to tell you about the open house and give you an update. Because what if the seller's a little uncomfortable with someone else holding their house open? It's like, well, I don't know Amy. Chris is my realtor. Who's Amy? So if that was the case, part of Chris's job with his seller would be to communicate with the sellers who Amy is and why she's like part of the team and how amazing she is. And this is how we do it. When you're with your sellers and you've set up your new listing and done all the paperwork and you're talking through kind of how you're going to proceed with marketing their property, help your sellers understand early on that what your plan may or may not be for open houses. So you're talking with your seller early on. So if you know darn well that with that listing of yours, that chances are with the open houses, that the open houses will be done by someone else in your brokerage, someone on your team, a friend of yours, you're already kind of telling them about that. Hey, let me tell you how we run our open houses. Here's usually usually what transpires, and you tell them, oh, okay, great. So then, a week down the road, when you're setting up kind of the first weekend of open houses, it's not a surprise to the seller that someone else is doing the open house for them. But you've already let them know that this is how you do it, and you need to have good communication around that. So I think that's an important tip. So finding your open houses. So identifying the top listing agents. Here's what I think is key. And I think, I mentioned my friend in Houston who did such a bang up job with open houses her first year. I think she ended up being the go-to open house agent for a couple big listing agents. So she really went in with the relationship aspect of building that relationship with that agent. That's why it can be really helpful for you to attend local brokerage, speakers or meetings or even happy hours to get to know those agents. If I have a new listing and I got a call from one of y'all to ask if you could do an open house, that's one thing. But if I get a call from an agent that I have no idea who they are, I would be open to it, but I would have to go through a process of understanding who that realtor is. Are they going to do a good job? Are they trainable? Have they done open houses before? Do they have a good system, right? So that it all matters, because you have a responsibility to that listing agent who has a responsibility to their seller. So ultimately you have a responsibility to that seller too, although you don't represent them. So really building those relationships with those other agents. You could even say to the listing agent, hey, it's my goal to be the best open house agent you have ever worked with. And here's what I do that's different, and you just start rattling these things off. If you have that conversation with like a top listing agent, they're going to recognize right away that you're different from the average agent, that you're a better communicator than the average agent, that you're a hustler, that you're willing to go the extra mile, that you've really go out of your way to make sure you fully understand the house and the neighborhood before you do an open house. That is so, so critical. Joanne, I'm seeing your comment. I used to leave a note for the seller when I leave, even if it's not my open house. Yeah. Thanking them, how much I love the house and how many visitors. That's a nice little touch. And that makes the listing agent look good to their seller too. So that it's a classy thing to do. Here's a little tip. And this actually is when I'm showing a property. This is not an open house comment. When I'm showing a property with a client and my client really likes the house, like I think it's possible we might make an offer on that house, grab one of your business cards and write the seller a little love note on the back of it. Hey, thanks so much for letting us see your house. We know you're busy on a Saturday. Really love the backyard. Your house is beautiful. Thank you, Julie. Right? So I love doing that. It's not an open house tip. That's just being a really good realtor tip. You need to work with the other agents to be that person. This almost goes without saying, but when you commit to an open house, you need to never, ever, ever, ever cancel or not show up. Now, what would be the exceptions to that? Somebody's bleeding badly. You're in a car accident. You have a child that's really sick that morning. But if that's the case, it's just know that between you and that listing agent, there's got to be a lot of hustling going on very quickly to find somebody to cover that open house. Because if not, it's a problem. Now, if you're rushing to the hospital with something really serious, you're not going to be doing that hustle, and the listing agent will have to. Never casually cancel an open house. Even if it's the day before, a good listing agent will have posted that open house in the MLS. Oh, Belinda says, if the house is occupied, I leave them a thank you note and the snacks and cookies. That's good for you. That's great. The leftovers. Luan says, I had to cover other agent for open house many, many times as listing agents. Don't be that person where you put the listing agent in a tough situation where they're either last minute having to cover. It's just a problem when that happens.